Good evening and welcome to the Jinn&Tonic show on this Friday, the 16th of February. I want to welcome my co-hosting and Abu, and we have our special guest, Ed Atkinson, with us this evening. Good evening, Ed. How are you this evening?
Yeah, good evening. Great, thank you.
So just for you, if you're watching this, myself, Stop Spamming, and Abu cannot see the live chat. We are getting an internal server error, so none of us can see what you are typing. So if you are a viewer and you're typing something into the chat, unfortunately, at this moment in time, all three of us cannot see it. Abu might be trying another computer, so Abu, if you can do that and see if you can bring it up. Only Ed can see the live chat for some miraculous reason. If you're a believer in miracles, then the miracle is on Ed's side tonight. But obviously, Ed will be doing a presentation with slides and so forth, so he won't be able to see the chat initially. So
I can see the chat on the other computer.
Can you? Oh, brilliant.
Yeah.
Okay, so Abu, if you can keep an eye on the chat for us, any questions, because we'd love some interaction here. Ed is going to share with us some things that we probably have never talked about on the show before. So we're looking forward to that. So before we get started, is anything like yourself, Abu, or Stops want to say before we hand over to Ed? Okay, perhaps not. So the guys are quietly in anticipation. Okay, Ed, I'm going to mute myself for a moment here. If you bring up your screen there. Before we do that, sorry. Can you, before you bring up your screen,
I'm gonna start chatting to camera, and then I'll bring up my presentation.
So can you tell us a little bit about yourself, what you believe, a little bit of how we met, or certainly what you're involved in, and then we can move on from there.
Yeah, absolutely. I was a Christian for about 20 years. I didn't come from a Christian family, but I converted as a teenager. And I hit doubts, and they got bigger and bigger. And eventually I decided I would believe on evidence. So I said, I'm going to have to stand outside of what I believe and think it through. And I want what I believe to be true, but I only want to believe it because of the evidence points to it. And that decision started a long journey, maybe 8-10 years of study, reading theological stuff and wider stuff on arguments in favor of God. Obviously, there was a sort of slide towards Christianity and all that, because that was the faith I was trying to hold on to. But I read books on all the major world religions, and eventually I got to a point of thinking, okay, there's just not enough evidence there, and I lived a life as an agnostic for a good 10 years, and then I've got more interested in it recently and enjoyed engaging the arguments and really being clear, and that has just drifted me further towards rejecting the idea that God exists. So I would call myself an atheist now, but I do keep keep it open. So I'm also an agnostic from that point of view. So that's me. I have started with some friends this discussion group in London that Rob came to, and the focus is respectful discussion on matters of religion, and I think it's got Christian in the title. So again, it has that Christian skeptic sort of discussion flavour. I can't kind of pretend my background is anything than what it was. But we have had an outing to Speaker's Corner. It was last June, and I'd heard stories about how Speaker's Corner was aggressive and kind of unpleasant, but that wasn't our experience at all. It was wonderful having gentle discussions with people and sharing ideas, and it was lovely. And I was there particularly with a friend of mine, Andrew White, and Rob and I got together. And since then, Andrew and I and someone else, Francis, a lady who also we know through that discussion group, have started a podcast. And I guess I've got this sort of double agenda of letting people know about this podcast we've started, which is again on this same whole subject of respectful discussions between Christians and atheists, but approaching it from the skeptical atheist side. Okay, do you want to jump in at all, anybody?
There was a guy, Rafay, answered early, Ed, why did you let Adnan get away with his creationist nonsense and the evolution denial when he debated?
Oh, lovely. Yeah, great. I was wanting to bend over backwards just to be listening. He spoke a lot more than I did. I didn't really want to hammer in. I wanted to let him say what he wanted to say and keep it respectful. I thought that I was pushing back pretty strongly on what he was saying, and I didn't want to sort of say, look, you're an idiot and that's ridiculous, but to listen and respond honestly. I guess I let him dominate this conversation, but there's no harm in that.
Yeah.
Okay, just as an update, I've started it on the tab and there it works, so I can also see the comments.
Great.
Good.
Shall I go ahead with my theme for our discussion?
Well, can you just give us a little bit of background why you decided to do what? What prompted you, or what pissed you off to the extent that you said, no, I need to do something?
Right, yes. When I became a Christian, the kind of flavour of Christianity gave me an expectation that I would know God. And that to me was fantastic. It was just what could be more amazing than having some kind of personal relationship with the creator of everything. So that was a big motivator. And also, actually sort of similar to the theme for tonight, I wanted to be on the team that was bringing healing and good to the world. And that was really exciting that being a Christian, I was part of that. And we had God on our side, kind of working in tandem with us. So those two things were massively invigorating and exciting in terms of being a Christian. And certainly, you know, enough to base your life on. But both of those things I was disappointed over. My experience of prayer was sort of speaking to the ceiling with nothing coming back. And I tried all sorts of ways of addressing that. I joined the charismatic movement. Does that mean anything to anybody?
That sounds familiar, but I can't say I remember much about
it. In a way, it's the sort of Christian version of Sufism in a very broad way.
So it's more
somebody is asking in the chat whether you have looked at all the evidence, whether you've looked at the independent sources, and I don't quite understand what that is. Does that tell you?
No, I haven't. If it's Quranic sources, no. I've looked more thoroughly on the Christian side and very broadly.
No, he says independent reports of the crucifixion and resurrection of Christ. Because as far as I know, there are no independent sources. So I don't quite understand what he's talking about, unless he's talking about the stupid Josephus and Tacitus and things like that, which is ridiculous. I don't know. Do you know of it?
No, I don't know of any independent sources at all.
Okay, sorry, I'm just relaying what is happening in the chat. Okay, yeah. And then what made you so angry that you decided to do something about ethics?
I missed the last question. Angry that made me decide to do what?
To do what you are doing now, which is talk about ethics.
Well, hopefully the talk will explain itself on that, and so we can come back to that
okay. Right.
if I haven't answered it.
Brilliant. All right, Ed. So let's get into it, because I think it's a fascinating something that I haven't come across before. So I'm going to be learning and listening very carefully here, and hopefully we can have an interesting discussion. And again, if you're a viewer, if you are either a theist or a non-believer and you want to join the discussion and have a conversation with ourselves and Ed, please let me know in the comments. I can now see this on a separate laptop. I'll send you a link in Facebook, so you do need to friend me in Facebook. I'll send you a Hangout link, and you can join us in the conversation. But otherwise, over to you, Ed.
Great. Yeah, so I'm going to sort of lead us through slowly this claim that what we believe is an ethical question, and in what way. And it would be good to see if any objections come up. I've listed quite a few objections that I'm aware of that I can address, but it'd be better for them to come from people listening in. Okay, so the beginning is the question: is what we believe an ethical matter? And I'm going to answer yes. I'll start with what I'm hoping will be a not too contentious example. Say I'm an ethical person. I want to do good. I want the world to be a better place because of my participation in it. And I come across someone who's homeless. And what I believe about that homeless person will dictate how I act towards them. If I consider the homeless person is a sort of cynical and lazy sort of sponger, then I will act in a certain way. And if I believe that the homeless person is a sort of blameless victim of capitalism, then I'll behave in a different way towards them. So by wanting to be ethical, I have then given myself this requirement to believe accurate things about the homeless person. And so I can choose to believe what I want based on my prejudices and upbringing and my my privileged background or whatever about the homeless person, but I'm not then acting ethically. It's an ethical decision to choose, and ethics is about choices, to choose to research it, to choose to look into the issue and see what the real reasons for homelessness are or whatever. So that's the sort of, I'm hoping a simple, uncontentious way of putting it, that what I believe about a situation maybe isn't directly ethical, but how I get to the belief is ethical. So I'm going to widen it a little bit to generally what my beliefs are about homosexuality. If I believe that homosexuality is wrong and it's harmful and it's an immoral action, then I will behave in a certain way towards homosexuals and towards kind of public policy. I might campaign in, against gay marriage or whatever. And then the opposites are true as well. If I think that homosexuality is perfectly fine, then I will campaign for gay marriage and all the rest of it. And what I believe has a very important impact on the world if I'm going to engage in that. If I think homosexuality is wrong and I stop gay marriage, then actually it turns out that that belief is incorrect, then I'm harming a lot of gay people who will be deprived the joy of gay marriage because of my actions. And vice versa. If homosexuality really is wrong and I'm campaigning on behalf of it, then again, I'm causing a lot of harm in the world. So it really does matter what I believe on that point if I'm going to engage morally in it. Now, if widen it to sort of to the maximum to what our worldviews are. If I believe that Islam is true, then that will guide a lot of my moral interaction with the world. And if I believe another worldview is correct, obviously Christianity or something, that will adjust how I will interact with the world. I will be sending Bibles to Africa, not Qur'ans, for example. And that will have a real impact on people's lives, especially if it's questions of, do I spend money on spreading my faith in my charitable giving, or do I spend money on aid work and health programs and that kind of thing? So that those are the impacts that what we believe have on the world. Okay, I'm going to now drop over to a PowerPoint.
Cool. Yep, go for it.
Yep. There we go. It's my screen.
I've got a few questions, but I think I just want to see your PowerPoint first, because you may well answer it in the PowerPoint. So I don't want to prematurely ask you questions that you might cover.
Right. Okay. So these ideas that I'm beginning to talk about come from W.K. Clifford, William Kingdon Clifford. He was a Cambridge mathematician and philosopher. You can see from the Victorian times. So there he is, and there's our wonderful man. And he wrote an essay called The Ethics of Belief that set out these ideas. And his most famous aspect of the essay, well, there were two. One is a story. And the story is of the ship owner. It's a Victorian times, so there were no kind of laws and things about these things. But the ship owner believed that his ship was safe, and he didn't engage a marine engineer to check over his ship. He just thought, well, I believe it's safe. I'm happy with that. And he sold a lot of tickets, and the ship merrily sailed to New York. But in the story, it proved not to be safe, and it sank with massive loss of life. And Clifford asks, okay, is the ship owner morally culpable? As a ship owner, is he due our kind of moral condemnation? And he says yes. And he wonders why. Now, in the background to this, Clifford himself was actually the survivor of a shipwreck. So this obviously mattered to him. But that's really just an aside. So we asked, did the ship owner do something wrong? Yes, he did. What did he do wrong? Well, he did believe the ship was safe when he sold the tickets and set it off. But he only believed because he had a hunch or whatever. Or when I tell the story, sometimes I talk about the ship owner went to a seance, and the seance looked in her crystal ball and said, "Don't worry, your ship is safe." So unfounded beliefs is what we're driving at. And so the moral culpability of the ship owner was in how he formed his beliefs. Clifford goes on in the story to say, okay, rewind the whole thing. And now this time the ship merrily sails to New York with no accident. Is the ship owner any more or less culpable, even though no one's been harmed? And he says yes. He said, our moral intuition is that yes, he'd done the same thing wrong by being foolhardy and sending people in a dangerous situation without due kind of due diligence, you could say, on his conviction that the ship is safe. How I see this is really it's just a summary of what I've been saying so far, that our beliefs lead to our actions. What we believe about the homeless man leads to how we act towards them. What we believe about homosexuality leads to how we act in politics or whatever. What we believe in terms of our worldview impacts our action on how we interact with people, what we convince them of, what we do with our money, and all the rest of it. So, and then our actions, in all cases, have impacts on others, and those impacts could be for good or for bad, depending on the circumstances. And then, so that the impact on others is a moral issue, and so it leads back to our beliefs being a moral issue. I can hear something on the line. Is it? Oh, it stopped.
That might have been me with something running in the background here. Hopefully, I'll just mute myself so that you carry on there.
Okay. Okay. So here's the extra step: how we get to our beliefs, and that is like stage 2. Stage 1 is what I've been saying so far. Stage 2 is, okay, we need to do due diligence on our beliefs. We are morally required to derive accurate beliefs if we're going to act in the world morally. Stage 2 is, how do we do that? And that's the bit in red. We need evidence from the real world, because top of the screen, the real world impacts the evidence, which we then feed into our beliefs. At the bottom of the screen is the real world, the impact on others. So it's like a kind of loop round in a way. So this combines into these 2 claims. And they're combined in that quote at the bottom of the screen. It's this famous principle from William Kingdon Clifford. I'll read it out. It is wrong, always, everywhere, and for anyone to believe anything upon insufficient evidence. And that's the second famous thing from the Ethics of Belief essay. The one is the ship example, and the second one is that principle. Of course, this has been discussed and pushed back. A famous person who engaged with Clifford on this is William James, who a lot of people will have heard of. He wrote on sort of pragmatism. You believe what sort of works for you.
Is it? I have a way. Now I understand why Speaker's Corner. I think Nietzsche read William James. Didn't he?
I think James was about 30 years after Nietzsche, but they would have overlapped, I guess.
Yeah, but I think
James's famous works early 20th century, and
no. I'm thinking about
late 19th.
I'm thinking about the wrong guy. This is the pragmatism guy. Sorry.
Yeah. For someone, for our sort of point of view, of us sort of meaning skeptics and that sort of thing, we're a bit wary of William James because of here he is in a séance with a spiritualist medium, so he was into that kind of thing as well. So in a way, we'd say, hang on, there's something not quite right going on here. So here's like the end of this little presentation and this claim. And James and people have pushed back. And in some ways, their criticism is absolutely valid. I would say that is an overstatement. I wouldn't really say anything is wrong always, everywhere, of anyone. So a good example would be to say lying is wrong. We all agree that telling fibs, lying to each other is wrong. But would we say it's wrong always, everywhere, and for anyone to lie? I think we could find examples of that. Obviously, the famous example is the Nazis knocking on the door, and you've got some completely innocent people hiding in your attic, and you will lie to the Gestapo trying to arrest them and take them to a concentration camp.
Can I just say before, I was thinking about Ralph Emerson, but yes. So
okay, lovely.
The guy that he read.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So people like James will sort of pick out, maybe there are examples where you could say there are good places where you would break this rule. There's a nice story that obviously came up later on, I think maybe from the 50s, 60s or 70s, of philosophers talking to each other, and they're saying you've got a father who visits his son's bedroom and sees all the evidence that he's smoking marijuana and stuff, but he chooses not to believe it because he doesn't want his relationship with his son to be corrupted by it. He wants to be supportive of his son and hopes that he'll kind of grow through it, and he kind of actively chooses to ignore the evidence and believe the best about his son for pragmatic reasons. So you may think that's a good reason or bad reason, but the point is that it's possible to think, for almost any ethical principle, to think of exceptions. I don't see ethics as black and white like that.
Can I don't know, is it, can I say things in between, or should I remember this for later?
Oh, the more the better. If it's out of sequence, I'll just say, but I really don't enjoy talking.
Because this is a kind of interesting question. I was listening to, Johan Hari is like, he's a journalist. He has written about, like, against the drug war, and now he's written a book on depression and so on. So he was talking about that, like how people are viewing drug addicts in a not beneficial way, nor for society as a whole or for the drug addict. That, like, the reason why someone become an addict or some may be an underlying problem to begin with, an underlying social problem, an underlying psychological problem. And if you view your son that is smoking weed or doing something else as just an evil, I don't think smoking weed is like the end of the world, but say that he does something more, like even more, like shooting heroin or something. Like, if you view that as that he is evil and therefore he is shooting heroin, that is not beneficial for him, it is not beneficial for society. But if you're seeing the underlying causes, that he starts shoot heroin because maybe he's suffering from some psychological pain or social pain, and therefore he's shooting heroin, then you have a greater ability, or ability is not the right word, a greater opportunity, I don't know what word I choose, to help this person and better for society. I just want to add that it's not even necessary to lie to yourself. It's like, I think even in this situation, it's better to just see it as for this.
Yeah. Okay,
Ed,
so
I wanted to ask. Oh, sorry. Carry on. No, I was going to
carry on. If you've got something to, that'd be great. I just wanted
to go back a little bit, because you said you talked about the ethics, and you said people have got an ethical obligation. What is the response? And surely there would be a response to somebody says, "Hey, I don't feel like I need to have an ethical obligation for my beliefs. I believe what I believe, and that's it. And believe it or not," and the reason I ask this is because I speak to some of these people on probably a weekly basis online.
Yep.
So what would be the response to people who would say something like that?
Well, my whole talk is a response to that. Okay. That if your beliefs impact on reality, then it's your ethical responsibility to make sure that they're accurate. If your beliefs have no impact on reality, then believe what you like. I'm waiting for your response.
But can you even choose, like, I can understand that theoretically maybe the pragmatic position might be good sometimes, but is it even possible to choose what you believe? Like,
yes, that's a brilliant point. I'm not talking about choosing what you believe. I'm talking about choosing how you derive your beliefs. We have a choice whether to go to the library and look up evidence for against our beliefs. We've got the internet, we've got all sorts of resources available to us that enables us to read material that challenges our beliefs and helps us check that they are derived correctly. That's our choice. That is an ethical decision, what we choose to do. There's a second principle somewhere. Let's see if I can find it.
And so obviously this is quite a challenge to people, religious people in particular, isn't it? Because they don't, I mean, the evidence they claim to have, we would reject as evidence, and then they're not using necessarily real world examples, are they? So they're claiming miraculous, supernatural, or extraordinary claims in order to prop up their beliefs.
Well, if they are well evidenced claims, then all power. Obviously, I've looked into this, and I don't think they are. But we can't dismiss evidence because it's a miracle. That is begging the question, I think it's called. Okay,
we'll talk about that a bit later then.
Yeah, but I think I haven't really nailed down the second half of my claim because it's a more familiar one. The first half is the new material that probably hasn't been discussed much, and that is that doing due diligence on our beliefs is an ethical issue. Okay, I'll go on and talk about the second half.
Go ahead.
And that is this claim that the only way to derive beliefs accurately and therefore satisfy this ethical requirement is to use reason and evidence. And so that is also needing to be justified. And this kind of the story I've told you kind of feeds into that, of the way that I had to make a decision to use reason and evidence to derive my beliefs. It wasn't something that happened naturally. And the way I argue this is, again, a kind of two-stage thing. The first thing is, we know that reason and evidence does lead to accurate results. We got this amazing success of science, and that is based on using reason and evidence only to derive what we know about the world. So I'm not at this stage so far saying that reason and evidence is the only thing. I'm saying reason and evidence is a successful way of finding out about the world and deriving true beliefs.
Yes,
and I think that's pretty uncontentious.
Yes, I think we all agree with that.
Okay, so having established that, we have now got something to stand on, something to lever from. We've got a confident way of looking at the world and getting true results. We can then apply that to the other purported methods of deriving beliefs. And we can see, using reason and evidence, that all the other options are lacking. And thereby that just leaves reason and evidence as the only way to determine a belief in a reliable, accurate way.
So when you say all other options, what other options for viewers and for ourselves have you come across, or are you aware of, that people have attempted to use to justify their beliefs?
Yes. Now, on this one, I'm afraid I'm going to be displaying my Christian bias in terms of who I kind of dialogue with. In Christianity, there's something called the witness of the Holy Spirit, and it's also had this name, the sensus divinitatis. And basically what they're talking about is a sort of feeling of the divine. A sort of sensus divinitatis means sort of sense of God, sense of the divine. Mm-hmm. The witness of the Holy Spirit, obviously the Holy Spirit is in Christianity one of the three parts of the Trinity. The idea is that the Holy Spirit kind of witnesses to our hearts that God is real and that kind of thing. So that is a sort of inner feeling, but dressed up as something more than that, in my skeptical view, anyway. So when we do class it as a feeling, then we can assess it with reason and evidence, and we see that one person has a feeling that the sun is the God, and someone else has the feeling that the Christian God is what they're being pointed to. Someone else has the feeling that it's Allah that is the clearly that's what their inner sense of the divine is pointing to. So they can't all be accurate, and so we're using our reason and evidence says, well, therefore this is clearly a flawed method at working out truth because of it's giving different people different answers. This is a theme that will come up again and again. Our intuitions are a very similar idea, that we have intuitions about people, and intuition is something that's been researched in psychology. There's a famous book, Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow, about intuitive thinking versus analytical thinking, by Kahneman, the Nobel Prize winner.
Yes, I'm reading at the moment. Yes.
Yeah. So you'll see that I think it's type 1 thinking is the fast, intuitive thinking.
Correct.
And that's fantastic. There's nothing wrong with it within itself, but accuracy isn't what it's there for. If you want accurate thinking, Kahneman shows how that's type 2, analytical, slow, careful thinking. So intuition is fantastic for quick answers that your brain doesn't need to work hard on. They work most of the time reasonably well, but if you want accuracy, it's not your thing.
Yes, and he actually uses
summary,
examples, doesn't he? He uses examples to very easily show you how bad your intuitive thinking is on certain things.
Yeah. So again, a lot of people have their worldview based on intuition, and Kahneman and others show that is not an accurate way of doing it. And if you want to have due diligence in deriving your beliefs, intuition is not an option. Feelings would be another one. Now, personal religious experiences is another one. Some people do have really strong religious experiences and believe because of that. The host of the Unbelievable show, I don't know if that's familiar in your world.
Yes, I'm aware.
Justin Brierley.
Yes, I'm aware of him. Yes.
I think he's wonderful, but he's a Christian, and he has honestly said that he believes because of a strong religious experience he had on a summer camp growing up as a teenager. And that's sort of why he believes, and sort of obviously he sort of confirmed it with some other stuff, but that's the sort of basis of it. And that's pretty common, that people do have strong religious experiences and they interpret them as the God that they grew up with or whatever, and that's why they believe. But again, research has been done on the parts of the brain that give us religious experiences, or experiences that people interpret it religiously, and it shows that it's not a reliable method of deriving accurate beliefs. Another one would be uncritically accepting holy texts. So obviously the Qur'an, the Bible, Hadith, all those kind of texts that people just uncritically say, well, that's truth. But because these texts disagree with each other, again, someone using reason and evidence would say, well, because they disagree with each other, they can't all be true. And so all but one of them is going to be false, if not all of them. Therefore, it's not a reliable, accurate way of deriving accurate knowledge about the world.
On that point, though, Ed, again, share your view. I'm not sure that's a good objection for us to bring to theists, because they will obviously say, well, yeah, of course, all the rest are wrong because mine is right. So while we could step back and say, obviously, there are competing views out there, and oftentimes they're conflicting. Yeah, I'm not sure that's something that's of any value or weight to the theist, because that to them that's water off a duck's back. They would say, hey, I agree with you, except my one's the correct one.
Yeah, so that's a brilliant point. Well, what I'm saying is not that your book is wrong because it disagrees with other books. I'm saying that the method of using a book to derive a worldview is flawed. So it's the method I'm attacking, not the actual book. If you could prove that your book, using reason and evidence, is an accurate, it can accurately be said to be the revelation of God, absolutely go for it. That's not my point, so it's not the book itself that's the problem, it's the method you use to derive truth. Picking a book off the shelf is inaccurate. Using reason and evidence to show that the book is actually genuinely the word of God is in theory justifiable.
Yes, but I guess they would need to use reason and real world evidence to show that, because the book is just a book of claims.
So they cannot never refer to the book as evidence in any way, otherwise it's circular. So they've got to use, as you are saying, reasons and evidence, which are outside of the book.
That's exactly what I'm saying. What good. My vague attempts at sort of being clear have been greatly enhanced.
Good. Okay. Yep.
Is faith a thing? Obviously, in my discussion with Christianity, faith is used a lot. Would people say, "Well, I just believe on faith" when you're talking to someone with an Islamic background?
They will get there. So if you ask enough questions, you get back. It's either we don't know the mind of God or God's mysterious. And so, AKA, now we just need to believe. We can't find any reasons. We can't interact with God. We're at a point where we can no longer give any answers. And at this point, instead of being agnostic or, apportioning our beliefs with the evidence, we are just going to make that leap of faith. So yes, that does happen. But you've got to ask a number of questions, because most of the people that we interact with typically have heard some of these things, so they've got like a ready-made answer in their head that they haven't really thought about a lot themselves, but that they've heard from other people. And that's typically how it works for us.
Yeah. So again, I mean, does it need saying that faith isn't an accurate way of working out what's true about the world?
No, I don't think you'll have any argument from this panel.
No, for sure. Okay. But what interests me is, what exactly is your definition of faith? Do you subscribe to any one?
Stop. Can you just don't mute yourself so quick. You're cutting yourself off there. We can't hear the last few words.
Oh, here too. I thought this was only on the other one.
Try again. Just ask that question again and give yourself a couple of seconds before you mute yourself.
Okay, interesting. What is interesting for me is, do you subscribe to any one particular definition of faith?
I try not to. When I'm talking about faith, I like to try and hear from the person I'm talking to what they mean. In the absence of any of that, I would use the sort of typical atheist's definition that faith is what you use when your reason and evidence is given up. And to say, reason and evidence get you so far, and then you use faith to sort of fill up the rest to what you want to believe. So it's
okay.
But
because I came across the definition which.
Yeah.
No, it's fine. It's just that I'm interested in hearing what other people say about this who have thought about this, because as you quite rightly say, most people don't even think about it. So I thought, okay, what other people say? Because I've come across this definition which says that faith is a belief when you cannot falsify or verify it any longer. And this is, in my eyes, very catchy, and I can understand it immediately.
Yeah. I would be more cynical than that. In a lot of people believe on faith, and what they mean is, even if the evidence is in dispute with what I believe, I'm still going to believe it. But there are much better, in terms of a skeptic, a much better definition of faith. Tim McGrew is quite a well-known Christian philosopher, or apologist, really, I guess, and he would say that faith is a commitment. So you believe certain things, but then you take an action. And one of his good examples is getting on an aeroplane. You believe the aeroplane is safe, but you only have put your faith in the aeroplane and the airline and all the rest of it when you actually get on the plane. So he would define faith in that way.
Yes. Now I hear similar things, and obviously, he's probably got more of an argument, but prima facie, I would reject that, because that's not the same faith that theists typically talk about. So they're talking about something which we don't. The reason people have faith they get an airplane is because we've seen airplanes take off. We know the history. It's easy to get evidence to say that planes are one of, if not the safest mode of travel. So as soon as they start to use real world examples and say, you non-theist, you atheist, you agnostics, whatever the case is, you also have faith. The typical sort of really poor example that they give sometimes to us is, hey, do you know that you've got a great-great-great-great-grandfather? And you go, well, we could do a DNA test. Have you done that? No. So in a sense, what they're going is, hey, because you haven't seen it, you still believe, and that's similar to the faith that we have. And it sounds to me that McGrew is saying the same thing, but they're using examples in the real world. And typically, most of these people, when we ask them about it, they're talking about something extraordinary or supernatural. And then they want to equate the two so they feel like we're on the same ground.
Mm-hmm.
What is your thought?
Well, my thought's not very helpful because I would push back by saying, okay, let's get the New Testament open, which is the bit of the Bible that talks about faith. And you'll see that what the authors mean when they talk about faith there is not Timothy McGrew's understanding, but the more believing stuff outside of evidence side of things. The verses like we walk by faith, not by sight, for example. But that's not very helpful in this context, and you'll have to do my work for me on that.
Well, I think it could still be useful if you're speaking to a Christian, obviously.
Oh, absolutely, yes. But I thought this show's more targeted at
yes. So stops
discussion with Islam.
Stops. Is there any sort of similar verses in the Quran that come to the top of your head, or Abu, that Muslims would use? I can't think of it off the top of my head, word for word.
Can you think of it one more time? Of what?
Of faith. So is there sort of some definition in the Quran that that's
okay,
similar to what Ed mentioned for the Bible?
Well, faith in the word is iman, but so there are two words maybe you should know. One is yaqeen and one is iman. And iman is maybe what we translate it as faith, and yaqeen is more certainty, or what you should call it. But iman is not, in Islam, it's not only it is a kind of metaphysical thing that you have, and you can have it in larger or smaller extent. So like
it was easy. It's much easier. It's the first pillar. It's to believe the
yeah. So in order for to be mu'min at all, you have to believe in God, in the prophets, and the books, and the angels, and so on. But iman is also something that if you do good deeds and things like that, if you read a lot of Qur'an and you don't commit any sins and you do a lot of good deeds, your iman, your faith will increase. So it is some kind of a metaphysical property that exists in you and can decrease and increase. But in order to be a Muslim or to be a mu'min at all, you have to have yaqeen. So you have to have a certainty. So if you have doubt in you become a kafir, which is kind of weird. But I don't know if that answered the question.
Okay, so it doesn't sound like per se, because I had to step away for a moment, that there's a specific verse like Ed quoted in the Bible where you're walking. What is it? What is the quote? Without
yeah, we walk by faith, not by sight.
Oh, okay, yes. So it's almost like closed eye. You're walking closed eye in a sense.
Yes, yeah, just not using what you see, not using evidence around you, but using something else.
Well, I mean,
the Bible actually has a definition of faith, which you don't find in the Quran. The whole Quran concept is based around this thing that you believe blindly, and that is it. But in the Bible, you actually have several definitions of this.
Yeah. The Hebrews is the most famous one. Hebrews 11 verse 1. Okay. Faith is the certainty of things not seen, or something like that. So again, it's the same concept.
But it's like, for example, in the Quran, there is this, like when Abraham, Abraham wants to see God, and God asks Abraham, "Do you not believe?" And Abraham answers that like, "Of course, but liyatma'inna qalbi," like to make my heart. How do I say that in English? Heart feel good, like have a nice feeling. So it's not that Abraham doesn't believe; he already believes. In fact, he is the next best person that has ever lived, according to Islam. He's like the next most mu'min of all. But he still has this curiosity that he wants to see God, just to make his heart feel good.
Yeah.
Yeah,
faith is in Christianity. It sounds like in Islam as well. Faith is like it's a good thing. It's a virtue of itself.
Yes. I think religious people in general, Muslims and Christians, see it as a virtue. Whereas, of course,
Yeah.
I won't speak for you guys. I don't see the way it's defined there. I don't see that. I would use the word trust. When I get on an airplane, I trust that I'm going to be able to get safely to my destination. I don't have faith because I think that word has got a for me anyway, it's got a religious connotation. So I won't use the word I have faith that I'm going to reach the destination with the airplane and it won't crash.
Yeah. And so what I'm saying in this... Oh, okay. Can I carry on then? What I'm saying in this whole kind of presentation is almost the opposite of that faith is not a moral virtue, but a moral failure. That's my overall message in this little presentation.
Yes. Yeah. I think we would agree with you there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good.
Okay, but in the Quran, the whole concept is that you must place your trust into God because God knows best. So this is the principle. Allah knows best is the principle of Islam. If you don't have that, you can never be a Muslim.
Yes, that happens a lot. So when we're having conversations, and you may not have come across it in Speaker's Corners yourself, but that often comes up at some point when, the argument doesn't have anywhere else to go. It's, well, Allah knows best. And that's kind of like we take it on faith.
Yeah. Okay. You asked me for the kind of things that would be alternatives to using reason and evidence to derive your basic beliefs. And I've got through all of them except for one. So I've talked about this sense of the divine or witness of the Holy Spirit. I've talked about intuition, feelings, religious experiences, holy texts, and faith. And the last one is just simply adopting the belief of your parents or of your culture, your upbringing. And again, just for exact same reason as I outlined for quite a few others, that is clearly an inaccurate way of deriving true beliefs, because around the world there's so many different versions of what the truth is based on that method.
So let me ask you, Ed, in your experience, and whenever you've had conversations with, can we say, advanced theists, what else do they say, apart from science, can give good reasons and evidence?
Well, these arguments. So they try to give these theistic arguments. Some of them will be very familiar with you, cosmological arguments, arguments from design, those kind of things. Talk about the resurrection, of course, a lot. And then they talk about miracles, either seeing a miracle or much more often hearing stories of miracles. And the kind of things I've talked about, I guess, a little bit, the sort of sense of the divine. The people pushing that are top. The most famous Christian philosopher in the world, Alvin Plantinga, is the one who's pushed artists as the actual basis for his belief. He says logical arguments, and even William Lane Craig, who's a famous Christian apologist.
Yes, we all know him.
Says, but you show using all these arguments. So even he ultimately bases his belief on the Holy Spirit not on his arguments. Famous person.
Yes, I've actually seen a video of him saying, hey, if all the arguments turned against me, I would still believe because of the witness of the Holy Spirit, which to me is just incredible. Right. That somebody can say that and yet they can go and put forward arguments. Because, it's almost like the arguments that are there as a backup. They don't believe it. They may or may not believe them, but they wouldn't care anyway. So that's extraordinary to me.
Yes.
Yeah.
It is, yes. William Lane Craig. I am saying the most apologist using arguments and evidence. I'm saying unethical. According to Clifford, and I agree with Clifford, you are being unethical in how you derive your...
Can you just try something for me if you could? Can you turn off your webcam? So if you go to the top there, you'll see that little bar where we had it, because you're getting a bit of a delay, and also I'm losing some of your words. I don't know if the other guys, but we're not hearing you consistently. So I'm wondering if turning off the webcam will help.
So, okay.
So there's... That's it. That's it. Thank you. Perfect. Yeah, you got a lovely picture there. So let's go with that.
Okay, good.
That
Yeah, let's meet in the middle of London.
We might that might smooth it out a bit, because I think the video and your audio is just bottlenecking your connection there.
Okay, I haven't quite finished.
Okay, carry on.
So what I've done is I've tried to show that, well, I believe I have shown that how we form our beliefs is an ethical question, a moral question, a moral responsibility, a moral duty to choose to look into the evidence. And then I have shown how reason evidence is the only way to go if you really genuinely want to have true beliefs. One final thing to say on that is the this list of failed things like faith and feelings, intuition, they're all internal senses. It's just the brain generating stuff internally. Reason evidence is external. We are looking objectively at the world outside of us. We are not generating truth. We're looking to the external world and seeing it. So that's why reason evidence works and the other ones don't.
Losing you a little bit.
I'm going to go through.
Sorry, try again. We lost you there.
Implications of everything I'm saying,
Mm-hmm.
and then objections. And hopefully there might be. I haven't been looking at the comments board. Hopefully there might be some objections coming in.
Go ahead.
So here's a sort of secondary principle from Clifford from the I think it's from the essay. It's wrong always, everywhere, and for anyone to ignore evidence that is relevant to his beliefs or dismiss relevant evidence as facile. To dismiss relevant evidence in a facile way. So in the same way, we have this ethical duty to derive beliefs using evidence. When evidence is there and we choose to push it away, to ignore it, to dismiss it in a facile way, that is morally culpable. So the ship owner has some hint, he creaks and things of the ship. You think, oh, and then if the owner then dismisses that evidence, pushes it from his mind, then he is being morally culpable. And that applies to us in all of our beliefs, if they have actual impact on the real world and other people's lives, which of course they do. And here's another quote from my man Clifford. He warns, purposefully avoiding the reading of books and the company of men who call into question your presuppositions. He's saying of that person who does that avoiding of books and company of men who call your belief into question, he says, the life of that man is one long sin against mankind. So he's quite a polemical man, is our Clifford. So it's our duty to seek out evidence that goes against our current worldview. Even, as atheists, I'm not saying we're any different from anyone else. We have a worldview. I have a kind of understanding of how the world works. And if God's real, then I'm completely wrong in the worldview I have. And it's up to me to kind of keep the evidence open and consider it when it comes along and look into it all as I have been. And if I want to act morally, say in a homeless project, then it's my duty to look into homelessness and really understand that what I'm doing, interacting with the world, it makes it a better place, not a worse place.
Yes.
So that's the overall case. I don't know if any sort of clarification, I think, before we consider some objections.
No, I think that's a good summary of it. Stops or Abu, have you got anything you want to add there before it goes into some objections? I think, Ed, again, some of our listeners, this is the first time they're hearing it, so there won't be particularly many objections, if any, through the chat at this moment in time. But
right.
If
is someone having a look, see if there's anything going on there?
Yes, I'm having a look here at the moment. Sometimes they chat about other things as well. So, there'll be side chats going on at the same time. But what will happen potentially is as this goes online and it's recorded, we'll get other people watching, and then there'll be comments. So if there's any comments like that, then I'll pass that on to you through Facebook.
Well, okay. I mean, hopefully I can deal with some of them preemptively from my list now.
Yeah. Okay. Go ahead.
Maybe it's a good idea to summarize this.
Summarize the whole argument.
Yeah.
Okay. Step one, what you believe impacts on your actions. Your actions impact on the real world, with real people having their lives better or worse because of your actions. So what you believe matters, and it matters morally. How you get your beliefs, what choices you make to derive your beliefs, is therefore morally significant. The only way to accurately derive beliefs is using reason and evidence. And the reason for that is we know reason and evidence does provide accurate beliefs when we apply it to the alternative methods of getting beliefs, such as intuition, sensus divinitatis, whatever, faith, your upbringing, your holy books, whatever method it is, reason and evidence shows that it's flawed in some way. So reason and evidence is left as the only game in town to derive your beliefs. And so we end up with the ethical principle. It's wrong always for everyone anywhere to believe on anything other than evidence. And then my final
evidence.
Evidence is, to me, observations of reality. You can, and Clifford doesn't, but I throw in reason and evidence to make it broader. So if there is a good philosophical argument that proves God exists, then that's reason, and that's fine, fair game. I'm not sure if Clifford would agree with me on that.
I'm asking because we have a lot of people who maintain that the Quran itself is evidence.
Well, it's evidence for what was thought in the 7th century God to be, but it's not evidence on its own. It's just, I suppose you could even say it's claims, but I think
he means that the Quran is like a miracle, and because it is a miracle, it is proof that it is God's words, and therefore you should just accept it.
Yes, I think I haven't looked into this in great detail, but I'm aware that some people say that the Quran previews modern science. So, for example, I think
there's a totally different topic.
Yeah, okay.
That's a huge thing.
Yes, no, but that is trying to use reason and evidence to argue that the Quran is special, which, in terms of a enterprise, okay, I think it fails. But as an enterprise using reason and evidence to derive a worldview, then that's the sort of thing that I'm up for. But I just think it completely fails.
Yes, I guess what you another way of putting that from my point of view is if they were making predictions, accurate predictions that actually came true, then one could potentially be persuaded that there's something special or something unusual about certain claims in the book.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. And it would be based on the real world, obviously. So
yes,
we need to match whatever's being said in the book with what we can ascertain about the world around it. Yeah.
But if you say your evidence that the Quran is holy is because your feelings and your intuition about it, then I'm saying, well, no, those are faulty methods to derive. It's not evidence; it's something else.
Yes, agreed. Yeah. All right. Do you want to go ahead and offer some objections?
Yeah. Well, the first one I've sort of covered already, and that is that Clifford's claim overextends itself. So you could legitimately attack the principle that, you know, all people, all times, all that sort of thing. But I'm saying, well, wait a minute. Lying isn't always wrong in every circumstance. You can think of some circumstances where lying would be moral. So just because you can think of one or two exceptions, and I'm not even sure that we have, that breaks Clifford's rule, doesn't mean that it's not an important consideration to put in the mix with all the other moral considerations we have. It's not, you know, we're not saying it's your only moral consideration is to choose your beliefs accurately, or choose your method rather accurate that produces accurate beliefs. You know, we've got moral obligations to our parents, to society, and all the rest of it. So it's just one of the moral considerations that people haven't realized, and I'm trying to highlight. I'm not saying it should dominate everything. So that's objection that we've covered. I think an important one is the claim that, well, I put it this way. Someone's saying, look, how can you atheists lecture me on morality when you don't have a basis for your morals at all? I'm sure you're familiar with that.
Yes, yes.
And so this needs a lot of thinking about. I would say that if you yourself, the person I'm talking to, wants to be moral, if you've already decided you're moral, you're a moral person for whatever reason, you know, because of your religion or background, or it doesn't matter what it is, once you've decided to be moral, then I'm showing you the implications of that commitment to be moral. It has implications, and how you derive your worldview is one of the implications of your desire to be moral. So I don't need to get bypassed into showing a basis for my morality as an atheist to discuss this. I say, okay, you want to be moral, you embrace morals, then this is what it means, and you have a moral duty to look at your worldview critically and look to evidence. So that's one way of approaching it. Another one would be to say, certainly a lot of people who are theistic like to turn to morals to make us atheists sort of squirm a bit, and they think they've got a moral argument. And again, I don't want to discuss whether it's true or a good argument or not, but I just want to point out that often the argument goes, look, the person believing God would say to us, look, you have this sense of obligation. You know that you have moral duties. You know that morality is objectively real. You can't ground that in any way except God. Therefore, you should believe in God. So if they are true to that, then they are saying, yes, morality is a real thing. And so I'll piggyback on that and say, yes, okay, we all agree that morality is real. We do have obligations, and therefore I'm showing you the one aspect of what these obligations are, and that is to derive your worldview accurately. So that's how I would cope with that. Well, I would respond to that objection. Any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I think that's a good way to do it, because because otherwise they take you off on seemingly like a red herring path to try and get you to justify your worldview.
Yeah, that's right.
That's not the crux of this particular inquiry. Let's put it that way.
Perfect. Yes. Yeah. Okay. So that's number one. Another one that I've heard is that everyone bases their life on things that they can't prove, and so that gives me a free pass to believe what I like. That would be an objection.
Yes, we hear that a lot. We do hear that a lot. So, like, yeah. you can't prove that you had a great grandmother. They go back far enough because we can't DNA test. It's all she's been, decomposed in the ground. How do you know? But again, I think that sort of,
yeah,
that's they're trying to equivocate there, I would suggest.
Yes, I think so. And it's the same way as saying, well, you can't possibly tell the truth every moment of your life, all the way through your life. Therefore, you shouldn't even try to tell the truth. It's sort of like that. That's what that objection would be if it was applied to the moral principle not to lie.
Yes, I hear this a lot, Ed. I don't know if you do. Maybe not so much with advanced theists, but well, sometimes they do, I guess. But they use the word absolute or certainty. And even in definitions of knowledge, nowhere, as far as I'm aware, does those words appear. But there seems to be an equivocation between those words because we often use them in normal language, in the street. But then when we have these sort of conversations, those sort of words will creep in. So I often hear theists going, "But you're not absolutely sure, or you're not absolutely certain," and that somehow, as you say, they seem to think that they can get a back door with that.
Mm. Well, I'm saying that. Lack of certainty is a virtue under this argument. Being open to being wrong is the first step to allowing reason and evidence to shape your worldview. And that's something that, new evidence can come up all the time. New arguments can come up that we weren't aware of, and we've got to be open to change. And if we're not open to change, then we're not living by the principle.
But the problem that I hear with that, Ed, is the pushback that we get is that, hey, you guys, when I say you guys, you non-theists, I'm sort of using the language that I hear them respond to me with, hey, but you guys, science is always changing. These are the words I hear. Science is always changing, so therefore you don't, you can't have any level of certainty in your beliefs, never mind knowledge. You can't have any certainty in your beliefs because science is continually changing. Here we are claiming that we've got an objective set of facts that don't change through the ages, so we've got something that's better than yours. So our beliefs are in fact grounded in good reasons. I'm not sure they would say evidence because but we've got something that you guys don't. What would your response be to that?
Well, science has improved beliefs. So we still believe the world is round. And we now know it's not absolutely spherical, but it's sort of slightly not round in a particular way. And then, we do more and more work, and our beliefs on the shape of the Earth improve, but the basic picture stays pretty well the same. And when there have been more revolutionary changes in our worldview due to science, very rarely have they been overturned. In fact, I can't think of an example. So, for example, it was amazing when Newton realized that these very simple laws were controlling the way the planets moved. And that big picture wasn't undermined by Einstein. It was adjusted by Einstein.
Yes. The one objection that I hear is, hey, we used to have a static state theory. We've now got a Big Bang. And that was a paradigm shift is again, the terminology that is put to me on occasions. Therefore, there's a good example of where science had a great deal of, they sometimes use the word certainty in the static state, and now we realize it's in fact not static, but it's it's expanding, inflating, whichever term. And so that's what they use as an example to show where there was a paradigm shift, and so therefore science is not to be trusted as much as we should, or as much as we do.
Sorry if I'm interrupting, but are you talking about how Einstein's relativity creates uncertainty, or?
That wasn't where I was going.
Okay.
It was more that Newton's laws
got updated.
Accurate,
okay.
But when things start moving near the speed of light, then you need Einstein's relativity to improve the accuracy.
Yes, but that is it's not really that it's changing. It's that first we have a very, very blurry image, and then you get a little bit less blurry image, and then you get a little bit. So,
that's right.
Newton didn't he just says this is how gravity works, and you can calculate it, and it's very easy, and it's not wrong in the sense that it's just that he didn't go into explain what gravity was. And now
there is that as well. Yeah. So once science sort of had its affected how we see reality in that sphere, it made a big step. And then the basic understanding that Newton gave us hasn't been revolutionary, blown away. It's been improved on.
Yes, I agree with that. I often use the word science keeps improving, so it builds on what's before.
Yeah,
as you said.
Yeah.
So Newtonian mechanics has just been improved upon with Einsteinian, and so the same has happened with quantum mechanics. So that gives us an explanation where general relativity fails. So yes,
Yeah.
And we still haven't combined quantum mechanics and Einstein's theories in a satisfying way. So that is like the next step. And if you talk about gravity, one thing that, like, if you can solve the problem of quantum gravity, then you get it probably even more accurate picture. So,
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, that's right. Going back to the steady state universe, I'm not sure that was a conclusion of science. It was just kind of what you would imagine without data, that we see the heavens and the planets and the stars, and we think, well, I guess they've always been there. And then when people start being able to measure it and see they're all flying away from each other, and there's cosmic radiation background, all the rest of it, then you say, oh, okay, what the sort of simple guess we had to begin with is proved wrong, and science actually has sort of put its oar in the matter, and we've changed things. It's not like science had a conclusion that was then wrong. It's just science didn't know, and then once data came in and science could actually contribute to the discussion, it concluded that there was a big bang.
Yes, and I think it's getting back to the point that you made, which is good reasons and evidence is the methodology we use, and we do not, as far as I can tell, and you haven't brought one up, and I've not heard of an effective one. I remain agnostic if there is one, but that methodology is the one that we use. And so maybe it's not perfect, but the methodology itself is by far the best, and anything else that comes up is measured against that in order to determine, its veracity in the world.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, because it's our only fixed point to test the others from.
Yes.
The others which we just don't know. So that's the second objection, that because if we have to base our life and decisions on things that do have a bit of uncertainty left in them, it doesn't mean it gives us a free pass to ignore reason and evidence.
Have you got an example of that?
What?
What have you heard that?
I guess, an example of that objection?
Yes.
Well, I think you've given a good one of the science. We're trying to think of another one that when we make important decisions based on, say, getting married. I think people love talking about this as an example. When you choose to get married, you just can't know everything, and you don't know if it's going to work out, and you have a sort of certain leap of faith about it. And therefore it's valid to leap of faith and become a Muslim in the same way. So I would push back against that by saying, well, you're foolish to get married until you have really thought it through and said, look, am I infatuated? Is it all just a sort of flush of falling in love? And is there something really solid behind all this? The kind of questions, certain questions I asked to do, do we make each other laugh? Are we friends first and lovers second? The kind of things that would indicate a strong, long relationship. So you're not just saying goodbye to reason and evidence. You're making the decision to get married to this person based on a whole mixture of things, and where reason and evidence can pitch in, you absolutely use it, and you'd be irresponsible not to.
Yes, agreed. I used to do some work in that field, so I know what you mean.
Oh, right. Yeah. Great. So just because you can't absolutely seal up everything doesn't mean you don't have a duty to use reasoned evidence, and it will get you most of the way. And what is left open is good. You leave it open, and it leaves room for more reasoned evidence to adjust you if that's what it's going to do. So it's basically follow the truth wherever it leads, and that's the ethical thing to do.
Yes, good. I agree with that.
Now, here's an objection that Tim Keller came up with. He was on this unbelievable show with Justin Brierley I was mentioning an hour or so ago. And he's quite a famous Christian apologist of the nice kind, as it were, the sort of more respectful kind. And he was discussing something, and right at the end of the show, Clifford got mentioned, and he objected that Clifford's principle itself is a worldview. He's saying you should base what you believe on evidence. He says, "Oh well, that's just another worldview, like Christianity, Islam, all the rest of it." But it's a bit rich from him because he's famous. This Tim Keller chap, he's from New York, and he's written a famous book called "The Reason for God." So if he actually stands by his book, he would say that he believes in God because of reason, and so reason would be his worldview, not God, as it were. So he kind of undermines his own argument from what he said and what he's published, his book "Reason for God." So I think it's ridiculous to think that deciding to believe on evidence is a worldview. I think a worldview, certainly N.T. Wright, who's a Church of England bishop or former bishop and a very well-respected author in these things. In one of his big books, he has a whole chapter on worldviews and what they are, and they are a lot more complicated than just one-line principle.
Yes.
A worldview has a whole narrative to it. It has symbols. It has practices. All sorts of stuff, and to say that one line, "Oh, I believe on evidence," is not a worldview.
Yes, I would agree with that. I'll find that a strange objection, but there you go.
Yeah. Another one, which theists love, and it's valid sometimes, is whenever you say something, "Oh, you said that's a self-defeating statement." Have you heard of that?
Not in those words, but I know what you mean by that. Yes. On rare occasions, I'll come up against somebody that sort of says that.
Yeah. Okay. So to explain what we mean, if I say this sentence is false, the sentence can't be. It sort of defeats itself.
Sorry, just say that again. You broke up a little bit there.
If I make this statement, this is the ultimate self-defeating statement. The statement as follows: this sentence is false. So if the sentence is true, then it's false.
Yes, is that like the liar's paradox, that sort of thing? Similar.
Yeah, that sort of thing. Yes. Yeah. And it is a useful thing to use. It's not always just playing silly games, because people often say there's no such thing as ultimate truth. Someone who's sort of a bit of a relativist will say to sort of show that, let's all be nice to each other and not claim ultimate truth and knock each other over the head with our competing worldviews. Let's all get along. And they'll say there's no such thing as ultimate truth. So before you think about it, does that sort of make sense?
Just repeat that again.
There's no such thing as ultimate truth. Someone making that claim.
Yes, I come across, isn't that sort of like radical skepticism and almost sort of solipsism, that sort of view? Yeah,
sort of post-modernism. Let's all love each other, get along, and not have this harsh Calvinistic Puritan atmosphere around truth. That's sort of what the claim is, how I understand it anyway.
Although
Yes.
I don't think postmodernists are not that
Yeah.
loving. I think they're
Putting that
Okay.
aside, putting that aside, yeah.
It's a bit of a hippie sort of thing, I guess. Anyway,
Yes.
I only mention it as that is a statement that defeats itself when you think about it. You're saying there's no such thing as ultimate truth,
Yes,
and you're making
saying
this
it, yes,
ultimate claim about truth.
Yes.
So it defeats
Exactly.
itself. Yeah. So that's a bit of an aside to show that someone's saying, okay, you've made a self-defeating statement. They might be onto something, and it's worth listening to them. So let's analyze Clifford's claim that you should always believe on evidence, and say, okay, is that self-defeating? So can we use evidence to believe the statement? So you got this statement, you should always believe on evidence. Is that defeated by itself because there's no evidence to take up that claim? That's where the person's coming from by saying, Clifford, you've made a self-defeating statement. Okay, so hopefully so far I've got to the point of you understanding the objection before I actually address it.
Mhm.
Okay. So my first response is that it does do what it says. So Clifford didn't start his essay, here's a claim, let's see where it goes. He ends his essay, having talked about his ships and his all the rest of it, with, therefore, after all this reason and evidence and argument, I conclude that you should believe on reason and evidence. So it doesn't self-defeat because it does exactly what it's supposed to do. It supports itself using reason and evidence. So that's the big kind of pushback on that. So it's not self-defeating demonstrably. It's a conclusion, not a principle from which you then derive other conclusions.
I'm with you. Yeah.
And a more minor point is that it's an ethical statement, not a sort of factual statement. So you're in the realms of ethics, and that is not necessarily factual language. It's the difference between sort of murder is wrong isn't necessarily a fact. What is the fact is, if you adopt morality, then murder is wrong, and that's a sort of different thing.
I see what you're saying.
But that's a sort of less important point. I think that's enough on that one. I'll just look at my notes, because the main thing is that it isn't self-defeating.
Yes, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah. Plantinga has a way of kind of trying to invert all this. So maybe it's worth looking at him. He's this Christian philosopher that I said was so famous, and it came up and uses his sensus divinitatis. And he tries to use reason and evidence to sort of bypass the need for reason and evidence. And he says that a belief is warranted if the way you get to the belief is due to everything working as it should.
When you say everything, you mean reason and senses and so forth.
Yes, that's right. So basically what he's doing is presuming that God exists, and then saying we've been designed and created to believe, and part of that is to believe in God. And so if everything's functioning correctly, we will then believe in God. and so therefore the belief is warranted because it's in line with how it's supposed to be. But so that's like starting with the answer and justifying the process from the answer. And I'm saying, well, you've got to justify that. I think that's how I'd respond to that objection. If you could start with any answer you like, that pink pixies created everything, and therefore pink pixies made us to believe in pink pixies, and therefore my belief in pink pixies is justified. So I think I'd maybe use that sort of approach to show that, look, if you start with the answer, of course you can justify it, and by coming up with silly counterexamples, it shows how that line of reasoning is invalid.
Yes, because he would need to demonstrate that, in fact, because your senses and your rational faculties are working, they had to come from a God. Because if your senses and rationality are working from a naturalistic point of view, then you can have warrant. In his view, then you could in fact have warranted belief. So he's got to show that God is the source of your rationality. And it seems to me he's got to show that, because otherwise we could make the same argument from a naturalistic point of view and say, hey, evolution. I know he's got the argument against evolution, and there's obviously people that have challenged that. But you could, in theory, make that argument as well.
Yeah. Yes, it's not exactly an argument about evolution. It's sort of tried to show that if you believe in evolution, then it undermines your naturalism.
Yes,
that's what he's trying to do.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, so those are the objections I've thought of.
We've lost you there. Try again.
Those are the objections that I'm aware of, and I've discussed and explained why I don't think they are genuine objections.
Yes, and I agree with that. So, well, I obviously, I think on the panel here, and I'm sure my co-hosts can share their views. I think that presentation just gives us a different slant on it, and obviously I agree that if you claim that you have, well, how would I put it? Maybe you can just summarize the argument in its entirety now with both, because I don't want to misrepresent what you're saying. So maybe you could just summarize the entire thing in a short thing so we've got a summary of it, because I do agree with you, but I think you will be able to summarize it slightly better than I would.
Okay. So we start with our observation that our beliefs impact our actions, which impact on other people in the world. And where that's the case, deriving our beliefs is important morally, because our actions in the world and how it affects other people is in the moral realm.
Okay, so quickly before you, now actually summarize first. I'll let you summarize, and then I'll bring up something on that first point. Go ahead.
Okay, so
I also want to bring up an important point, but yeah.
Excellent. Okay, but I'll plow on. So then, so we now established what we believe is seriously in the moral realm, and because morality is about our choices. It's what the choices we make as we derive our beliefs, that's become a moral issue. And the sort of thing we're talking about is, do we look at contra evidence for our beliefs? Do we face our beliefs and ask, is it true? Why do I believe this? Really seriously face what we believe and adjust them if need be. That's a choice that we make, and that's the moral choice, to really take seriously the due diligence we need to do in deriving our beliefs. The next stage is to show that only reason and evidence are genuine methods to derive beliefs. So therefore, when it's all combined, you get the principle that it's morally wrong to believe except on reason and evidence. And that's a sort of version of Clifford's principle. And then I'm saying that doesn't trump other moral requirements. It's one to go in the mix with all the others. So not to lie, to be kind to people. Those are all moral duties. And this is another moral duty that should be in there with all the rest. That's my summary.
Good. I like that. So, Abu, do you want to go first? Because it might be we have the same question on that first part. So you go first if you like.
Okay, no, it's just this first important part. I agree that what we believe determines our kind of moral values and how we judge things. And this is like, as you know, I'm very skeptical, to say the least, of those who believe in free will and even of compatibilists. And I think one of the moral problem in believing in free will is that you're going to judge people unfairly. You're going to judge people as if they have the free will to do things. Before we were talking about drugs, for example, but there are all kinds of stuff. And I think we are creating unnecessary suffering and immoral acts because we believe in this false idea that free will exists.
Yeah.
Okay, but different to what I was going to ask. So if somebody comes along and says, "Hey, listen, I accept all of that, but I live in a shack. I hunt for my food. I don't interact with anybody else. Surely this doesn't apply to me." Would that be valid for somebody who does not interact with other humans?
Yes, I think so. That's right. So if you live as a hermit, what you believe doesn't really matter morally.
Well, I mean, if you live on a desert island and so on, you're still gonna hunt. Like, if you believe that it's
that's true.
You can hunt animals and so on. And
yes, that's true.
And your belief system may affect that.
Yeah.
So, for example, if you have a Jainist belief system, or even Buddhists, because practicing Buddhists are not allowed to kill. They are allowed to eat meat, but they're not allowed to kill the animals themselves.
Yeah.
So would we say that it would not affect somebody then if there were no humans around, or would we say then that it would require no interaction with other?
You can say, for example, if you're living in a isolate, what is it called in English? If you're in a prison and you're living, they isolate you in an isolation cell or whatever.
Yeah.
And they are giving you the food and so on. You can choose what food you get. Then maybe you can say that. But even then, you have to interact with the guards and so on. So it's very.
I think yes. Yeah, I'm trying to avoid being dogmatic. In the same way, I wouldn't say it's wrong always and everywhere to lie. I wouldn't want to say that this principle is so watertight that it can never be overridden.
I think you can.
I would agree.
That's quite easy. I think you definitely can find situations where it would be deeply immoral not to lie. Like, for example, if Gestapo knocks on the door and say, "Oh, do you have any Jewish children in your basement?" "Oh, yeah, I actually have that. I don't want to lie."
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, that's right.
I mentioned that one earlier on.
Yes.
It might be worth us.
And also, we're in the West. We've got leisure time. We've got the luxury to look into our worldviews. That someone who's living hand to mouth, their moral responsibility to their family is, and to feed their family, is worthy of them putting all their efforts and time into that, and going to the local library and working out if their worldview is correct would be morally wrong because they'd be letting down their family.
Yes, I suppose you could say that. Although I think the principle would still stand, as generally speaking. But you're right; you can always find an example where that would not be the case.
Yeah.
Because if they're interacting with their family and they have certain beliefs that are detrimental, then going to the library or whatever the case is, or doing anything else, could even override providing food. So if they have the belief that I don't know, Harris uses the example, every third child should walk without one eye, then that one could plausibly say that might override to some degree the need to get food. If you're going to injure your children and you have some kind of belief running around in your head, then that principle would still hold. But I'm in agreement with you that you can definitely find examples where it would not be an absolute rule, but it's certainly a good one. Most of the time.
Yeah, and to be aware of.
So why not generalize it?
With your other, just something to be aware of, along with all your other moral requirements.
Yes. Sorry, Stops. What did you say?
I asked, why not generalize it? Why not say, just, I understand that not everybody can, and not everybody has the opportunity, possibility, or whatever. Why not generalize it and say, well, don't believe without a good reason? And the stress here is on.
Yeah.
You cut yourself off there.
I was agreeing up to when you got cut off.
I can't get used to this.
There's a
Just leave your mic on, Stops, unless you've got a lot of background noise.
There's a fellow, I don't know, it's like a fellow atheist here in Scandinavia. He always says that without good reasons. So I started to imitate him.
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense. Come on, I mean, because it doesn't really matter what you have at your disposal. If you don't believe, well, anything without a good reason, then, or if you believe something and somebody challenges you, then at least then you should realize, hang on, I'm believing this without a good reason. Whether you now have something at your disposal to rectify this is a different story. But at least you're not forced to believe something if you don't have a reason to.
You cut yourself again, Stops. But yes, I hear what you're saying. Ed, I don't want to take us into very different territory, but obviously you and I listened to Stephen Law, and he seemed to my ear anyway, take it a step further with the X claims. How familiar are you with it? And I've read over it, but I haven't got it with me, and I don't want to take us there unless you are somewhat.
I loved it.
Okay.
Yeah, so you were there when Stephen Law talked to us.
I was there at that time, yeah.
Yes, I read the essay a couple of times before he presented, and then I heard him talk through it. It was tremendous. And yes, it overlaps with what I've been saying a lot on the second half of using reason and evidence as the method to get to your worldview.
Are you able to articulate it or bring it up to articulate it, or is it a bit?
I'll try to. Yes. What it was the territory where I was talking about using religious experience and the sense of the divine to derive your worldview. It was in that territory. His essay, and he's saying that there's this thing called X claims, and I don't know why I use that terminology, but it was all about using our sense of our intuitive sense to derive beliefs about ghosts, about God, and that kind of thing. So initially, he talked about how we have this this ability to see agency where there isn't any. So that the typical example is sort of hearing the rustling in the forest, and you instantly think it's an animal or a tiger or something, and then you realize actually it was just the wind or whatever. But we have this propensity, because it's a survival mechanism, to see agency when there isn't any. And he gave a lovely example of some ghost show on TV where a friend of his, Christopher French, was the skeptic amongst all these ghost believers, and they went to this haunted house, and all these ghost believers were sensing there was something definitely in the cellar, and they could hear it hissing. Must be a ghost down there. And after they'd all moved on elsewhere into the house, Chris French went down, and he saw that what was producing the hissing was one of those automatic air fresheners that squirt out a little bit of perfume every couple of minutes on a timer. You know what I mean?
Yes, I'm with you. That's right.
And he did this to show that the sense of agency we have is a flawed sense. It doesn't always produce accurate results. And then he said how using that sense that we have to infer God, ghosts, whatever, is irrational. and he used this example of he used to have a couple. One was a production line, where at the end of the production line they have a he called a widget production line, and at the end of the production line the widgets come off, and they are put under this red light as a means of testing them for some reason. And if you were just sitting there looking at the widgets going past, you'd say, oh, they're red. But when you're then told, oh, they're under a red light, your belief that the widgets are red has a defeater. You can't now believe the widgets are red because of you now know that the light shining on them is red, and therefore they could be any color and still come up red.
Yes.
So your belief that widgets are red has a defeater. And he gave another example, but short time, so let's just keep to that one. So he's saying our sense that there's ghosts, or our sense that there's a God, or whatever it is, now has a defeater. And the defeater is that it produces all these conflicting results. And it's shown to be wrong in some circumstances, such as Chris French and his air freshener. So you can't now logically say that my sense of God or whatever actually points to God, because there's this defeater that just destroys it, and you've got to think of some other way to get to belief in God or belief in spirits or all the rest of it. And then he finished the talk by saying, okay, I did talk about this mechanism of the hyperactive agency detecting with the tiger in the forest, but actually my argument hasn't now relied on that to be true. All I've shown is that our sense of agency is wrong in some circumstances and is flawed and gives conflicting results, so we know we can't rely on it. We don't need to explain why it's unreliable. All we do need to know is that it is unreliable. So I think I've got there as to what he was saying. So his conclusion is not that gods and spirits don't exist. It's that we don't have a reason based on this sort of sense of agency, sense of the divine, intuition, all that kind of thing, to believe in God.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's a bit more of an advanced one. I think people, if they're interested, would need to go and read it up to understand a little bit better. But I was quite impressed with that. But as you say, it takes a little bit to read it to undertake.
Yeah.
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 Good. I think that's been excellent. Carry on. Yes, you're going to say something.
I don't know how near the end we are. I've got a couple of announcements, things I want to say.
Sure.
How many of your listeners will be in London, do you think, and wanting to engage in these kind of things?
Hard to say. I'd probably say a handful, to be honest. I think we get people from all around the world and or from parts that wouldn't get to the UK often. But please do advertise and share your meetup. Go ahead.
Yeah, so it's not only is the existence of our meetup, so we meet in a pub. You don't have to drink alcohol, of course, down in the basement of a pub that's called the Somerstown Coffee House. What you need to do to find us is to Google Meetup, which is the platform we have our meeting website on. Meetup Unbelievable, which is the name of this Justin Briley's show, and then you could put in Christian or skeptic or something like that, and you'll see links to our meetup page, and you'll get details of all our meetings, and you can join and get notifications and all the rest of it.
And when's the next one, just for people who might be listening to this very shortly?
The 12th of March.
Okay, so there's
Monday night, 12th of March.
Mm-hmm.
And it's going to be on a Christian theme, so maybe less interest to some of your followers on Jesus' claim or promise, rather, that he would return within this generation, and the whether that is actually what Jesus said, or if it's just been interpreted that way, and whether if he did claim it did come true, or if it's indication that that Jesus wasn't prophesying and was making a mistake.
Well, if anything, that would probably be more of interest to some of our Muslim viewers, because they often challenge the Christians in Speaker's Corner or elsewhere for that matter.
Yep. Well, they could well get some juicy material from that, but there'll be Christians there defending it as well. So it'll be both ways. I particularly mention it because I put a post on the Speaker's Corner web Facebook group saying, does anyone know of a Islamic apologist who would like to speak to us? And to have a night on Islam. So we're off our normal topic of atheism, theism, and Christianity, but to concentrate particularly on Islam. And we do get Muslims who come already, but to have
the problem is as soon as you know something about Islam, they run.
Okay. Yes, I'm not sure how many would do that. They certainly the ones that we know and interact with. I'm not saying there aren't any, but certainly if you're a Muslim and you're listening to the show and you would like to present to Ed's group because I've been there, these are intelligent, rational people, both Christians and non-believers. This is not your Speaker's Corner type group. This is a group that's interested, that will have a rational, quiet, interesting discussion. So if you are Muslim and you're interested in presenting on a particular topic, then obviously you're welcome to do that. What I typically find, Ed, is that the people that we interact with, well, certainly I have in the past, has been at Speaker's Corner. And that is not the same, obviously, as the meetup group. And where, you might get some more likely to get a Shia Muslim, because they tend to be, well, certainly in my experience, a little bit more rational. Whether their views are any better or not, that's obviously, from our point of view, we don't think so. But they tend to be a little bit more rational in the sense that you can have a discussion with some of them, because what Speaker's Corner has become is like a verbal battleground. So it isn't about what's true or likely true. It's how well do I show up for the camera and what sort of show do I put on. So those sort of are unlikely to want to come to something like that where they would be queried by intelligent people. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Okay. Well, the invitation is there anyway.
So which just for people know, which group have you advertised this on? Which Facebook group?
Meetup. It's all one word.
Okay.
The call for a speaker, the Speaker's Corner Facebook group.
The Hyde Park Speaker's Corner group, that one?
Yes, that's right. The one that's been going for a while, and I think they had a bit of hoo-ha over the moderation and stuff.
Yes, that's right.
So it's what's left, because I think they're mostly Muslims now, and not so many of the.
Yes, that's right. Well, that would be the place to go. Yeah, as far as I'm aware, that would be the place to put it. So if you put it there, maybe you'll get a response. I wouldn't be surprised if you don't, but that would be the best place to put it. Yeah.
Yes, I haven't yet.
No,
it was about a week or two ago I did it.
Yes.
Okay, so that was one of my announcements, and the other one was this podcast that we're starting. And again, this unbelievable show is like, well, I suppose it's the discussion group that we've just been talking about, actually, in the pub. Three of us who are all on the skeptical side have teamed up and have just launched a podcast called Doubts Aloud. And that's doubts, obviously the spelling of that's clear, and then aloud as in speaking out loud rather than permittable.
Doubts Aloud, for those who didn't hear, because Ed did just drop off for a moment. Doubts Aloud. And where do they search for that, Ed?
Well, you get your podcast app, put in the search facility, 2 words, Doubts Aloud, and we'll come up. And
what typical type of topics are listeners likely to hear?
Mostly discussion between atheists and Christians. We have released one so far, and we're talking about Christian claims on the resurrection, and in particular, the conflicting stories in the Gospels are used by Christians to say, "Oh, look, genuine eyewitnesses always see something slightly different. Therefore, this is evidence for it being a true event." And one of our team is a lawyer, a prosecution lawyer, and she was saying how that is just not the case in real legal circles.
Yes, it's a shame I missed that. It's a shame.
Well, you haven't missed it. Yeah, well, you missed her doing the talk in the meetup, but that's the topic of the first episode of the podcast.
Yeah, it's a shame I'm not in London. It's a shame you can't record those for your podcast, like a live one where you just put a mic on somebody and record those meetups as well, because that could be quite helpful.
Yeah, we might. Well, maybe we could do that. But the whole point is that, you know, people coming to the meetup probably don't want to have their words broadcast.
Oh, okay.
It's like safe space, or as how people call it nowadays.
Okay, fair enough. I guess if they don't want to, they don't want to.
Yeah, just the permission we'd need for everybody to, and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
I think it's easier just to say, look, there's no microphones, no recording. You can say what you like. No one knows you're here, and that sort of thing.
Good. Anything else from your side?
Those were my two big things. Our meetup group and our podcast, Doubts Aloud.
Brilliant. Well, unless there's anything from my colleagues, I think that's kind of nicely wraps it up on the 2-hour mark, or give or take. Anything else from Stops?
I would just like one small thing. I would like to strongly condemn all these false flagging actions now with You What Mate, with COE, content over everything, that they're closing down channels just simply because they cannot handle the truth. That is so low, that is so childish, it's an admission of bankruptcy. And I do not understand why nobody, I don't understand. Muslims should be the ones who are telling their brothers not to do that. They should be the ones critical.
Yeah, so for those who don't know, some of the channels have had videos flagged. So a number of these channels either make critical videos of Islam, or they make recordings from Speaker's Corner. And because YouTube's terms and conditions have tightened up, but at the same time are very nebulous, things can be claimed or can be flagged as hate speech, and then the video can be removed, and that happened 3 times, and the channel can be removed. So there's been a spate of that recently, and a very what would we say, persons who films who's objective in the sense that he stands outside and filmed. He doesn't get involved in the discussions. He's not seen to be one side or the other. The fact that he filmed some interactions going on at Speaker's Corner that some people claimed was hate speech, I think, as I would echo Stops there, which is absolutely ridiculous. But that's, and I think, Ed, you're probably aware of some of these things. I think that's the way that some of these social media platforms are going now. People's feelings are more important than facts. And of course, there's a sense of dangerous precedent, and it'll never stop. So I would echo that.
Yep.
Yeah,
William Clifford was turning his grave.
Yes. But you know, that's where we're headed now. Ed, I want to thank you so much for being on. It's been a pleasure. I'm going to sort of listen back to this again. I think there's things there that certainly you've presented in a way that I have not heard before, and I think there's been some very valuable things. So I want to thank you so much. I'll be listening out for your podcast in future. And again, to anybody, look that up. Doubts Aloud is the podcast, and on the meetup group, it's unbelievable. Would bring you up, and it's a pub. Is it still next to the next to Euston Station?
Yeah, that's right. Yep, between King's Cross and Euston.
Yes, there we go.
Monday night, 7:30.
And that's normally what, once every month or once every second month?
Once a month, the second Monday of the month.
Okay, brilliant. So that's easy for people to do. So before you go,
I like the title, Doubts Aloud.
Yes,
thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, that's catchy. So before you go, Ed, I'm just going to hand over to my colleague, Abu, who does a hadith of the day. So this is like one of the sayings, or somebody that claimed that the Prophet said X, Y, Z, a bit different to Christianity in the sense that this isn't the Quran, but these are like sayings that are purported to have been said by the Quran that some Muslims feel are fairly genuine, and that's how we normally end the thing. So if you just bear with us a few moments while Abu reads this out to us.
Okay, I'll put myself back on.
Okay, so narrated by Abu Huraira, or Abu Huraira reported. The Messenger of Allah ﷺ said, Iman, meaning faith, since we were talking about faith before, Iman has 60 odd or 70 odd branches. The upmost of all these is the testimony of faith. La ilaha illallah. There is no true God except Allah. You can argue about that translation, but anyway. While the least of them is the removal of harmful object harmful object from the road. And shyness is a branch of Iman, of faith.
Oh, where did you? This is a good one.
As you can see, Ed, a lot of these things for English viewers and people who don't understand classical Arabic, you've got to read this sort of 10 times to even try and make semblance of sense of some of these things. It's just, yeah, it's not easy. And the claim that is obviously made by some Muslims is that this is a book, well, these are the hadiths, but the Quran is similar. The Quran is a book for all people for all time. And yet they have scholars to, you know, so it's definitely, and it's not done in a sequential order. It's, you know, largest to shortest surahs, so it's just very different to anything that we read in the West, but difficult to read in the sense that the translations are old and you've got to read it over multiple times, and it's not in quote unquote plain English. So yes, and that's just an example.
Lovely.
Thank you, Ed. Thank you very much. Thank you to all the viewers. Thank you for all the chatters and chatters. Before you go, please do me a favor, click on the thumbs up because we've already got 2 dislikes. Thank you.
Yes, please thumbs us up if you like the show. We appreciate it. Ed, we thank you so much for your time. You and I will catch up again on Facebook. Abu and Stops, thank you so much. Thanks to all the viewers, and we will see you next Friday. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Cheers. Good night.
Good night.